All right, so our last fireside chat, Ashwin Damera, CEO of Emeritus, and then we are honored to be joined by Shikhar Malhotra, the Chancellor of the Shiv Nadar Institute of Eminence. All right, and here we go. So if you don't like this, blame the writers, not the talents. Many of us have heard of the saying, curiosity killed the cat, but I bet many of you don't know that there's a second part to it. It's actually curiosity killed the cat and satisfaction brought it back. So here to talk about the importance of curiosity in education are Shikhar and Ashwin.
I'm so excited to be here with Shikhar. He's taken time off from his very busy schedule. He is the Chancellor of the Shiv Nadar University. He heads up the Shiv Nadar Foundation. He's a board member at HCL. He also runs the healthcare company that HCL has, and does a bunch of other stuff. And we're going to kind of pick his brains on a few of these as we go along. But just for the benefit of many people in the audience, some from India, some from outside, maybe, Shikhar, if you can start us off by just saying a little bit about what the foundation does, what's the impact that you're having, and then we'll take the conversation from there.
Sure. Thank you for having me. The Shiv Nadar Foundation, well, let me actually start with sort of the mothership. The mothership is an IT services company called HCL Technologies. HCL is a very large company that Shiv Nadar, whose name is on the foundation, he had started it about 47 years ago here actually in Delhi, whereas the rest of the IT industry was starting out down south. It was sort of a contrarian entrepreneurial venture. And it's a very large company. It employs about 225,000 people today. It's got about $12 billion in revenue. So that's really sort of the business side of it. But about 28 years ago, Shiv was really prompted by his mother at the time. And because Shiv was a merit cum means scholar, so he was a beneficiary of state grants and scholarships. And she sort of prodded him, saying that you've got to do something more with your time. Making money is not good enough. And so he sort of hem and hawed, and he realized that his true passion lies in education. And we started out in 1994. With a university in Chennai. It was predominantly an engineering university. Sort of fast forward to modern day, now we've got 9 institutions within the foundation. We've got a university here in Delhi, we've got a university in Chennai. The university in Delhi, of which I'm the Chancellor, is a multidisciplinary university with 4 different schools. In Chennai, it's predominantly an engineering college, but there are many other schools that we started a few years ago. We've got the VidyaGyan schools, which is a very contrarian, very unheard of sort of model, and I think you're going to ask me about that, so I'll talk about it. The Shiv Nadar schools is an urban initiative, and all of these are non-profit initiatives within the foundation. So it's about 2,800 employees that we've got in the foundation. At any given time, we have about 15,000 students. And well, since inception, I think we've invested over $1 billion into the foundation so far.
So let me just hear that again. You've invested about $1 billion?
Well, Shiv has.
That's pretty commendable. Did you raise money from venture capital or private equity?
For the foundation?
I'm just kidding. But, so we talked a little bit about making access to education and improving gross enrollment ratio. And how is India supposed to fund that? And here is a model, which is, companies that have done really well, individuals who have done really well are giving back to society. And this is really a great way of doing it through institution building. Now, there is something unique about your approach to education, though, which is the title of this conversation. And I learned this as I was talking to you before, which is the stress on curiosity versus careerism. Mm-hmm. A lot of us EdTech players, when we go to a university to work with them, we say, we want to create a course with you. What is that course? Data science, coding, business analytics, digital marketing. It's about how you can get that job, whether it's your first-time job or whether you can get a promotion or do better in your same company. So that's very careerism. But the view that you've taken is that it's more important to promote and foster curiosity.
Right.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
You know, it wasn't really a decision per se for us. It was more of an ideology that stemmed from Shiv himself, right? So I remember many years ago, I asked Shiv, I said, what's one of the greatest qualities that an entrepreneur should have? And he gave me the answer, which I've never heard of before. He says, a restless mind. Okay, and he said, that's the greatest quality. Because he says, a restless mind enables you to question, to inquire, right? And so it's a bit of an inquiry-based method of learning. And so I think that, you know, he wanted to build something that he resonated with, right? He's an incredibly curious person. He's an incredibly, he's one of the finest visionaries in the country, for sure. He's a first-generation entrepreneur. And so, you know, many of the qualities that he felt that he had the chance to imbibe, he wanted to create organizations that also impart the same level of thinking, skill sets, and ideology. So all of the institutions that we ended up building at least are connected through a common thread of leadership development. And we said we must emphasize the importance of leadership development because that aspect of leadership should entail curiosity at its core. Because, you know, everything begins with a question, right? Everything begins with inquiry. You can't, and I think, you know, a testament to that is the VidyaGyan schools, where we take farmers' children and we give them this life-changing opportunity, and they more than justify it.
Actually, Shikhar, good segue. Tell us a little bit more about VidyaGyan. You know, as I was hearing this from you, I was blown away. So for the benefit of this group, please tell us a little bit more.
So about 15 years ago, there used to be an advisor to us, TSR Subramaniam. He was a cabinet secretary, a very esteemed person. And, you know, he prompted Shiv. He said, he was from the UP cadre, right? So Uttar Pradesh, he prompted Shiv. He said, you know, in all of my travels across Uttar Pradesh, right, 220 million people, he said that there are some just mind-blowingly intellectual talent that just gets lost because they never have this opportunity for high-quality education. So we conceptualized a school. It's outside of Delhi here, and the other one is outside of Lucknow. So there are only two such schools that we have, where we take in 200 students a year in grade 6.
And you get about 200,000 applications?
We get about 200,000 applications.
And you take only 200?
Yes. It's not
I'm going to ask you about that later.
Yeah, okay. So it's not by design, right? I mean, in the first year, we only had 200 applications, but this thing is, you're sort of victims of our own success, I suppose. But these students have just sheer raw intelligence. But if you look at them, they're stunted with opportunity. They're even stunted physically, right? I mean, they're about, you know, half my height. They're thin and scrawny, but they have this, you know, they have this metamorphosis experience where through the education that you and I would have received, it's free. These are residential campuses and the very high caliber education. They go on to achieve some astounding results, right? So we have students that are studying on 100% scholarships. These are farmers' kids, so the only criteria is that they have to be from the economic weaker section. So they have to have an income of 2 lakh rupees or less.
So the only criteria that you can apply is your family income has to be 2 lakh rupees or less, which is approximately $250 for a household income in a year. So these are children coming from those backgrounds.
Yeah, yeah. So they're incredibly economically impoverished, and they do just some incredible justice to us because, you know, just the opportunity combined with the sheer intelligence. So we've got students that are 100% scholarship at IIT, Shiv University, Brown, Stanford, UPenn, I mean, you name it, right? They're all over the place.
And, you know, just hearing that, I was so blown away, right? Because we all say our mission is to make high-quality education accessible and affordable. Yeah. You're actually doing it, and you can see the transformation on people's lives through that.
Well, coming back to the earlier point about curiosity, I'll tell you 2 very short anecdotal stories where I felt very proud because I know that, you know, that we've instilled the confidence in them to ask questions. So I used to have a partnership with Johns Hopkins, and the president of Johns Hopkins visited VidyaGyan, Ron Daniels, amazing person. And Ron is a lawyer. So one of the students puts his hand up and he says that, you know, I'm just not able to understand this. Why does a medical school need a lawyer? Okay. And he said, no, that's a really good question, right? So he said, let me answer that for you. But, you know, I like the fact that they're thinking about this and they're not just taking things for what it is, right? And then I went to Stanford and there's a student there called Manu. So I asked Manu, I said, why don't you show me around? And he was showing me around everything there, and I asked him. I said, "So you're doing incredibly well. Tell me, what's the hardest part of adapting, right, to the U.S.?" So he said, "Understanding the concept of personal space." Right, which I thought was pretty cute, because for him, he says intellectually it's not a problem, but it's a cultural adaptation that's actually taking place. So we've got 2 such schools, and they're producing about 400 graduates a year. But this was a pure experiment that actually panned out.
So when I heard this for the first time, I was blown away. Then I collected my thoughts, and my next question, which I know you know what my next question is, why only 2 schools? Why only 400 students? This is a country where there are 600 million youth who need what you're providing.
Yeah.
How do you scale this?
So, VidyaGyan is not a proprietary model, okay? It's sort of like an open source education system where anyone is free to understand on what we're doing and even do it on a smaller scale or a larger scale, right? Whatever they wish to do. All we did was we proved that there are diamonds in the rough, right? And there's sheer talent at the bottom of the economic pyramid. They just need opportunities. That's all we really, we proved. But the cost of investment of time and capital is actually quite large. We spend about more than 50 lakh rupees per student to graduate them over the 6 years that they stay with us. The human capital involved to do this is very taxing, right? Because you're undoing so much of the challenges in the first few years. And the first 5 or 6 years of VidyaGyan really took the life out of us because, we were, it had never been done. So there was a lot of doubt from parents. There was doubt from the neighborhood. People were wondering, what are they up to behind these 4 walls with our students? But now VidyaGyan name is very ubiquitous in those neighborhoods. And it's even more so that the villages that these students come from has a significant uptake in school enrollment because there was a student from VidyaGyan that had actually enrolled.
Wow, fascinating. And you track those outcomes, right?
We track those outcomes. So, we track them very clearly. We make sure the students remain connected to these villages. So it's a challenging model to sort of scale, at that level. But we do want, and we get a lot of visitors that come to us and, they're inspired by what they've heard about VidyaGyan, and they try to emulate at least some aspects of it in their own foundations and their own institutions, as they should, because I think it's a great model for the country.
It's a great model. I commend you for what you're doing there. I'll shift gears a little bit to talk about higher education, so the Shiv Nadar University. Yeah. In one of the conversations we had earlier today, there was a discussion of whether an Indian university can ever be in the top 10 in the world. Mm-hmm. And I thought maybe to an institute of eminence, I should pose this question and say, do you ever think an Indian institution, academic institution, can be in the top 10 in the world?
I definitely think so. I mean, there's not a shadow of doubt in my mind, but the top 10, from what I understand globally, I think the average years of existence of the top 10 is about 170 years, give or take.
We don't have that much time, do we?
We will, so maybe not, certainly not in my lifetime, right?
Even I don't have that many years.
Well, so the question is that, is there a faster way to really get there, right? And I think that, you all know academia is, it's not the quickest space. It's not the most dynamic space, but it's very deep-rooted, right? And there's a lot of, things are done with a lot of deliberation. And we do think about this all the time, right? That, when will Indian universities get there? So I think it'll certainly take time. There's no doubt about that. I mean, I feel like, we may not be able to sort of, short this. But there are other aspects of what we should do to learn from what the others are not able to do because they've got legacies, which sometimes doesn't allow them to move as fast. And maybe that's the real opportunity of what we can enable us to do.
I have a trivia question for the audience. If we go back a few years, maybe 100 years, around 1900, how many US universities were in the top 10 in terms of rankings? In 1900, how many US universities were in the top 10? Well, 2? Actually, the answer is 0. So which country had the most number of universities in the top 10?
Germany.
I didn't tell him. We did prep, but not for this question. Germany. Most people will say UK, by the way. So things do change. Those rankings do change. But I think we may not have 100 years. I think the pace of change is much faster now. So there is innovation and there is some form of disruption that does happen, even with universities.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears a little bit. because of the HCL connection with the Shiv Nadar University, you have this beautiful opportunity for industry and academia collaborating. We see a lot of this in the US. One of our friends, Arizona State University, that works very closely with GSV, one of the things that they have pioneered is this kind of lifelong learning. So one of the big partnerships is with Starbucks, where they do a college achievement plan. I think 15,000 students. Tuition is completely paid by Starbucks. They get an Arizona State University degree. Many of them are just bachelors. I think the company invests $80 million to $100 million a year, Starbucks, in doing this. Why haven't we seen something like that in India?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, right? Because we were talking about it earlier that there are millions of people that need jobs. And there are, if you talk to companies, they say that, we're trying to give out jobs and we're just not finding enough people, at least in the Indian context for sure. And so it's a bit of a comical gap, right? That if the people need jobs and there are jobs ready for taking, then why is it that there's a gap? So a few years ago, we tried to address this a bit differently. And as usual, it started from Shiv, right? So, he likes to stir the pot a fair bit. So he called a meeting and he said, I want to try something different. And the problem is that whenever you say that, I want to try to change our recruitment model for an IT services company, that's like changing the core DNA, right, of the company in a way. Because, we got 220,000 people. We're recruiting all the time. So if you want to experiment there, it's a very sizable experiment. But he said that why don't we try something? Why don't we go and take school graduates and offer them an opportunity to earn and learn at the same time so that they can actually get jobs at HCL over a period of time, and at the same time they can do a degree. So we implemented this plan with, I think, about a few hundred people in the first year. This year we recruited 8,000 people into the program. Next year we're going to recruit 15,000 people, and we've taken the program global. So BITS Pilani is the academic partner. So the students come in over 6 years. They start earning, and they also start their degree preparation as well. And in 6 years' time, they've come out with an undergraduate degree. In the US, we've done the same thing with Purdue. So we're rolling it out actually over there. And as you know, it's university higher education can be cost prohibitive in certain places. So it's got a lot of appeal as well because there's no debt that they end up inheriting through this program.
And it's massive. I mean, just think about what you're doing there, because you're taking kids out of high school
Yeah.
and giving them a straight pathway into jobs. One of the challenges that India has is not enough kids, first of all, get to school, then finish high school, and then after they finish high school, only about 30% actually get to college. And you're kind of circumventing some of those obstacles.
So interestingly, in India, and this is a bit of an evolving process, so you learn as to what's desirable, what's not desirable. We felt that we can teach them everything that a university knows, and so they don't need a university degree. But the pushback we got from a lot of people, and the families more importantly, was that the university degree is really an insurance policy. So if you take that out of the equation, where does our insurance policy go? And so then we brought in academic partners actually for this, and we realized that there's only so much experimentation that you can do. At the end of the day, that sort of human element is very important.
So Shikhar, as we kind of wind down our time, I'm going to ask you a question. What are you most curious about these days?
Figuring my kids out. And they ask me all kinds of questions, right? So I like the fact that they're curious because they ask me tons of questions, and whenever they start asking my wife questions, she says, like, Daddy's much better at these questions, right? And so I get riddled. They're 10 and 7, so I really enjoy this phase, and they're asking me tons of questions. I do think a lot about how do we scale aspects of what we're doing to more students, and, especially in higher education as well, right? So how do we retain that essence of experimentation and experiential learning, because it is challenging certainly to scale that, and at the same time to scale that you also need a lot of educators that are skilled to be able to do that. So it's a sort of, it's a never-ending loop, but a lot of our mind and application goes in figuring those things out. We have an advantage of not having too much legacy, so we can afford to take some gambles and see which way it goes.
Okay, and maybe one question. We have a lot of entrepreneurs in this room. As somebody who comes from an entrepreneurial background and is entrepreneurial, any advice of how they should think of being an entrepreneur in education? not entrepreneur in kind of any other space, but in education, what should they look out for? What are the opportunities?
I think that with digital education, it's got incredible advantages to remain connected, but there is also a barrier that you don't get to understand your customer perhaps as well as you would if they were physically there with you. So you should certainly try to spend a lot of time with them and really understand, because it's such an emotional topic, right? At least in India, it's not a means to an end per se always, right? It's a life decision, it's a family decision. So spend as much time as you can to really understand the psychology of how they think and why they take these decisions. And if you can, if you're running a digital business, bring them in as much as you can and spend a lot of time with them physically before you can actually expand that.
Okay. Phenomenal. And again, I just salute you for all of the work that you're doing through the foundation. I've been very inspired by it, and thank you for sharing your insights and inspiring us all. Thank you, Shikhar.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, and thank you for everyone for still being here and hanging.